I kind of wanted to start off by doing a series, if you will, about processing the pandemic. Not that it's over, but processing the last couple of years, specifically through the lens of somebody who writes theater or creates theater. And the things I'm talking about are probably relatable to anybody, and maybe more specifically, anybody who creates and wants to create and wants to do art. But I do think there is something very specific to those who create in the world of performing arts, who rely on a live audience to come and see their stuff, because that just was not happening unless you happen to be in an area where restrictions were very loose, in which case, yay for you, I guess. But one thing I kind of wanted to bring up was grief. And I kind of mentioned this in my previous video about myself, where I felt like maybe some of the stuff I was experiencing I knew wasn't as horrible or as difficult or tragic even compared to some other people in the world, but that in some ways minimizing what I was going through wasn't helping. And I have kind of picked up on this sentiment a lot from people, that because they weren't going through the worst of it, they don't feel, even currently, like they get to talk about how hard things have been, because they don't want to seem like whiners, or they don't want to take attention away from where, there is more hardship. But I guess what I want to say or encourage anybody who might need to hear this is, please take time for your grief. And grief is particularly poignant because we often talk about our creative projects as babies, right? We talk about how they get conceived, and then we birth them, and then there are babies, and we have to let our babies go, we have to let our babies grow up, etc., etc. So when we use that language and it seems like we've essentially lost our babies, when theater is on hold and things that we were looking forward to have been completely stopped, and we don't know if and when they're going to come back, that is a loss. It is not the loss of a loved one or another human being, granted, so please don't hear me say that all losses are equal, but the experience of that loss still comes with pain and still comes with feelings that need to be let out. And I'm not an emotional expert, I am not a therapist, etc., etc., but my understanding of the grieving process is that it goes in waves, and you might have a fond memory one day and then completely break down the next, be angry another moment, and that emotional kind of turbulence or back and forth is just normal to the grieving process. I know that there are the so-called stages of grief. Again, I'm not an expert. I'm not trying to say that that is not the process, but my experience of grief is that it's kind of unpredictably cyclical through these different feelings. And I needed to give myself space to feel those things, which was also a big impetus for not being on social media and not sharing videos, because I had nothing to say. I had nothing to contribute. I was feeling like shit, and I needed to feel like shit, and I needed to grieve the loss of some things that I was really excited about. Heading into 2020, things were so exciting for me and my career. I had just signed on with agents in January. It looked like there was going to be a lot of amazing stuff happening, and then for all of that to come to a halt come March, April, May, and then even further for things to get even more just raw and real in June with George Floyd's murder and Black Lives Matter movement stuff. and then this so-called racial reckoning happening with white American theater. All of that just got so overwhelming, and I felt like I needed to be present and I needed to be there and socially responsible and whatnot. And at the same time, I needed to grieve. And there is still kind of this ongoing grief. I think that's the thing, is it's like an ongoing grief, because moment by moment, we did not know when things were going to change, when things were going to come back. And that is sad. So, and any aphorisms about like being patient or like, being productive in this downtime, like, I can agree with that. I'm not saying that that's wrong, but I wasn't there 100% of the time. And I don't think I could be there 100% of the time, because this grief, this sense of loss was also present, is still present. And looking back at who I was recording that year of vlogging, 2019 to 2020, I was such a go-getter. Everything was so next step, what's next? And through the pandemic, I've had a real confrontation with nothing is guaranteed. Nothing is for sure. And the pendulum has probably swung too far in the negative direction of like, don't get your hopes up at all. But I think that there's no way that I could have controlled the pendulum swinging that far, and maybe I have needed to be in this more negative space. It's not even necessarily negative. I actually think it's probably healthier for me to deal with my sense of loss and grief. So I guess I share that because maybe whoever's watching this just needs that permission that, yeah, maybe what you went through wasn't the hardest thing ever, but it was probably hard. And there are probably pains and there's probably loss that are in you as a result. And instead of us now putting on our smiley Broadway faces and saying, theater's back, it's so great to be back, I think a lot of us are still processing what all went down. So please give yourself that leeway, give yourself that kindness and time to be able to do that. And I would say it's especially felt in the playwrights and musical theater writing communities, especially if you feel like you're kind of in the middle, like you're not so successful that you're like Lin-Manuel Miranda, who, do not get me started on what an amazing pandemic he had. I know that's not fair. He probably went through a lot himself, but I'll address those mixed feelings in another video probably. But if you don't have that level of prominence or success, right now theater companies are going with their go-tos because they need to. So it can feel like a lot of us who were maybe on track to like finally be seen at a national level are being overlooked again, and we just have to be patient again. And it sucks. It really sucks. And again, that's not the worst thing ever. That is not the worst thing to go through. Our lives haven't ended as a result, but there is still a sense of loss in that, because we aren't getting to have what we thought we were going to have back in 2020, at the beginning of 2020, I should say. And I wish I had some tips on like how to grieve. Again, I am not a therapist, so I think researching other outlets for that would be probably beneficial. For me, what it has looked like is a whole mess. It can be just letting myself break down and cry for a bit. It can be journaling, it can be meditation, it can be just laying on the floor and trying to do absolutely nothing, not even listening to music, not even opening my eyes, and just kind of letting myself be for a while. It can look like distracting yourself with something cute and fun because you need to just get on with things. I know I just listed a whole bunch after saying I don't have any ideas, but I think I say it that way because I don't have a process that like, you should follow these 10 steps and you'll be on your way. It's more like, please allow yourself the ability to find how you need to grieve what has happened and maybe is still happening. We don't know what's happening. So, for whatever that's worth, I am right there with you if you're feeling any of the stuff that I was talking about. And if you haven't felt this, you don't need to feel bad. Don't feel like you now have to like go into this state of like, I have to feel sad now. No. If you were lucky enough to not feel that way, which I highly doubt, but if you were, you don't have to worry about feeling that way because it sucks. Well, that's my little talk about grief. Hoping to do a few more of these processing the pandemic videos. And let me know in the comments below what you think, your thoughts, your experiences, as well as any future topics or questions you think might be interesting for me to expound upon in future videos. Yeah, that's about it. I'll see you next time.